Good morning, I'm Fiona Young, the Democratic Services Officer for this meeting. The first item on the agenda is the appointment of a chair, and I understand that members would like to appoint Parish Councillor Rawlins to chair the meeting. Is that agreed? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to chair the meeting as requested. Can I start by welcoming members, officers, those watching on the webcam at home, and members of the public who join us today. Before I start the hearing, it's probably appropriate that we have a few introductions. My name is Councillor Stuart Rawlins. I'm chairing, as we've just said, the hearing panel. And today I have with me Councillor Rowley and Councillor Pavlovich, both of which are full and active members of the Joint Standards Committee. Both of which are members of the, or by substitute. There's also an independent person who will give us advice, Mr. Alex Oram, and we're joined as well by Democratic Services officers, the monitoring officer, and members of the legal department are in attendance. Item 2 then, if we're moving on swiftly, is the declaration of interest. Could I ask if any members have any interest to declare in the meeting today? Then if nothing's declared, we'll note that. Could I just, as I always do, say that should the conversation at any time go down a path where anybody feels uncomfortable, please interrupt and make a declaration at that point. Item 3 then would be the exclusion of the press and the public. Now I'm going to deal with item 3, where the panel will consider whether to exclude press and public at any point during the meeting. In reaching this decision, the panel will consider the views of the parties as expressed in the pre-hearing checklist and the pre-hearing procedure currently in place. The panel will also take into account the contents of the investigations report prepared into the matter, and the monitoring officer may well wish to add to my comments.
Thank you, Chair. It is recommended that the panel resolve to exclude the press and public from the meeting during the panel's deliberations and decision-making at the end of the hearing. In addition, should the panel wish to receive or consider legal advice, then such advice will be given in private. However, the substance of the advice will normally be shared with the parties. The panel's decision notice will, however, be a public document and will be published following conclusion of the hearing. So, Chair, the recommendation would be as follows: that the press and public be excluded from the deliberations and decision-making at the end of the hearing, because such deliberations and decision-making are required to be heard in private and should not take place in public. Thank you, Chair.
We have a recommendation. The only thing I thought might be missing from that is if we were going to private session for some legal advice or guidance. Would that be correct?
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
That would be right. So that recommendation plus the ability to go into private session should we require any legal advice which wouldn't be appropriate in the public domain. Are members happy to agree that? Yes. So we'll move on to item 4, which is a complaint against a member of the council covered by the Joint Standards Committee. We've had our introductions. Maybe it'd be appropriate at this point to have a brief introduction from Councillor Guildford complainant. Would you just like to introduce yourself very briefly?
Yes, good morning. My name is Mark Guildford. I'm a member of Hawkesby Town Council, and for the previous 3 years, I was the chairman of the council, which is the position I held when these complaints arose.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't actually discuss that. You're happy that there's the button on there when you speak? Yeah. The acoustics aren't particularly good in here. Would you like to just introduce yourself briefly once again, just in the same way for the record?
Okay. Good morning. My name is Mark Guildford. I'm a councillor on Hawkesby Town Council, and during the time period when these complaints were filed, I was the chairman of the council between 2019 and up until this last council year.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Stephen Pearson, the investigating officer and author of the report.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My name is Stephen Pearson, partner with Free Solicitors, and I'm the investigating officer today.
And can I just confirm that all parties have seen the final report of the investigating officer and have had the opportunity to engage in the pre-hearing procedures? I'm looking around for all parties. Everybody quite happy they've received those reports? Thank you very much. I would also like to confirm that Councillor Cuthbertson was invited to attend today's hearing. However, he is advised that he is unable to do so and has submitted a written representation which will be addressed in due course during this hearing. I would like to confirm that at the request of Mr. Pearson, we've agreed one witness, which is Town Councillor Carmichael, who's with us as well, has been invited to attend the hearing. I'd like to ask all here today, insofar as they can, to keep to the areas of dispute. Very easy on these issues to go off-piste and start diluting the whole process. A good place. I will now ask the monitoring officer to identify whether pre-hearing procedures have identified any significant disagreements about the facts contained within the report.
Thank you, Chair. In this matter, there is one complaint submitted about Councillor Cuthbertson. This can be found at pages 33 to 36 of the agenda. At the time of the complaint was submitted, Town Councillor Guildford was the chair of Haxby Town Council. The complaint relates to the alleged behaviour of the City of York councillor and is summarised by the investigating officer in his report, which is at page 5 of the agenda, as follows. Being submitted to inappropriate pressure, including by councillors using their role to behave inappropriately towards the clerk and the chair. Disrespect and alleged intimidatory behaviour shown to Mr. Councillor Guildford at public meetings, and disrespect on social media and in publications in order to undermine the Town Council (brackets) and Councillor Guildford individually. For clarity, the specific complaints against Councillor Cuthbertson are as follows, and these are as detailed by the investigating officer at page 5 of the agenda. It is alleged to have behaved in a disrespectful manner towards Councillor Guildford, having described the Town Council as a dysfunctional organisation, which was being, in quotes, run like a Wild West town, and verbally attacking Councillor Guildford. It is alleged that Councillor Cuthbertson demanded to speak at a Town Council meeting, and when the chairman refused permission, he described Councillor Guildford as being a dictator and undemocratic, as part of what Councillor Guildford regards as a politically motivated campaign against the Town Council. Within meeting of the Town Council Recreation and Open Spaces Committee, he is alleged to have erupted in a fit of anger, threatening to file complaints and making insults, whilst insisting that, as a city councillor, he had oversight over Town Council decisions. It is alleged that Councillor Cuthbertson took over a meeting with Yorkshire Water concerning local complaints over sewage and flooding in order to secure maximum publicity for himself and to undermine the Town Council. In response, Councillor Cuthbertson does not accept the allegations made against him. The investigating officer summarised his views as at page 8 of the agenda as follows. Councillor Cuthbertson denies behaving in an angry manner at relevant meetings, in particular at the Town Council meeting on 9th of August or the Recreation and Open Spaces Committee meeting on the 12th of August. He accepts that he may have raised his voice a little, but only to express his feelings over how poorly he felt a meeting had been run and to stress that standing orders were not being followed. Councillor Cuthbertson agreed that he was involved in meetings with Yorkshire Water, but these commenced before the Town Council became involved. In respect of agreed and disputed facts, the investigating officer has also noted, again at page 8 of the agenda, allegations have been made that Councillor Guildford has been accused of being a dictator with regards to the petition. These comments have been ascribed to Councillor Cuthbertson. However, ex-Councillor Beverley says that she used these words. On the 20th of August 2020, Councillor Cuthbertson submitted a written statement which features at page 113 of the agenda, in which he disputes his alleged conduct at Haxby Town Council meetings. The investigating officer's conclusions and findings can be found from page 8 of the agenda. As regards whether or not Councillor Cuthbertson has breached the Code of Conduct, the investigating officer has come to the following opinion, which can be found on page 12 of the agenda. I find that Councillor Cuthbertson has breached paragraph 3 brackets 1 of the City of York Council Code of Conduct by failing to treat Councillor Guildford on certain occasions, as well as other members of Haxby Town Council and the clerk. With respect. After some consideration, I find on balance that Councillor Cuthbertson has not sought to bully, intimidate members of Haxby Town Council, including Councillor Guildford, and I find that he is not in breach of paragraph 3 brackets 3 of City of York Code of Conduct. This is largely because there is a very genuine difference in recollection of the parties in terms of who apparently accused Councillor Guildford of behaving as a dictator at the meeting in August, and there is evidence from some ex-members of Haxby Town Council that they generally found him to be polite in his dealings with them. The City of York Code of Conduct, Chair, appears at pages 23 to 32 of the agenda. Can confirm that Councillor Cuthbertson did complete the summary, and those views do echo his thoughts in the pre-hearing checklist.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we'll move on to the proceedings themselves. I think it's wise if I just give a brief précis of the process today, so that people will appreciate that they'll have the opportunity. It helps us keep on topic at each individual section. So the investigating officer will first surmise his investigations and findings in his report. I'll then invite the panel and the independent person to ask questions of the investigating officer, and the monitoring officer may also ask questions at that point. The investigating officer has also requested the attendance of Town Councillor Carmichael as a witness. At this point, the investigating officer will ask Councillor Carmichael questions pertaining to the investigation's outcomes. The panel members, the independent monitoring officer and Councillor Guildford will all be given the opportunity then to ask questions of Councillor Carmichael. I'll then invite Councillor Guildford to ask whether there are any issues which ought to be raised with the investigating officer, and I will either put them to the investigating officer or, dependent on how the meeting is flowing, let those be placed directly across the table through the chair. Next, Councillor Guildford will surmise his case in respect to the facts in dispute. I'll invite the panel and the independent person to ask questions and then the monitoring officer may do so as well. I'll invite the investigating officer, I will then invite the investigating officer whether there are any issues which ought to be raised, and again I will determine whether these can be put directly or through the chair. Next, Councillor Cuthbertson's position will be surmised in relation to the facts in dispute. I'll invite the panel and the independent person to ask questions and raise comments, and then the monitoring officer. I'll then invite the investigating officer and Councillor Guildford whether there are any issues which ought to be raised or taken into consideration. Moving on, I'll invite each party and the investigation to make representations on each of the facts in dispute. The panel, with the assistance of the independent person, will then commence deliberations in private as previously agreed before announcing in public the findings and the reasons. If the panel finds that Councillor Cuthbertson has breached the code of conduct, I'll invite representation from the parties as to what action, if any, should be taken. The panel will then, with the assistance of the independent person, will deliberate any sanctions in private, but will publicly announce those sanctions and written notices will follow. I hope that gives everybody the opportunity to cross-examine and debate the issues at hand. So if we can start, I'd now invite the parties to surmise their cases, and I've agreed maximum of 5 minutes, though, to keep them succinct. It may well be that you don't take 5 minutes, but I will stop you at the end of 5. Could I start with a presentation by Mr. Stephen Pearson? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try and keep time as far as possible. As I said, I'm the investigating officer. Councillor Guildford raised 3 associated complaints against members. One you're hearing today, one is being heard this afternoon, and one was disposed of separately. Councillor Cuthbertson is a member of the City Council, and he falls to be dealt with under the City Council's Code of Conduct. The complaint, as you have heard, is made by Councillor Guildford, who was at the relevant time the chair of Haxby Town Council. I would say at the outset 2 things. Firstly, my view is that your decision is based on a balance of probabilities rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a criminal matter. And secondly, I have to say that my complaint has been hindered to some degree by the initial reluctance of Councillor Cuthbertson to be interviewed by me, instead submitting to written questions, which inevitably means that it's difficult to get some of the colour, perhaps, of the response to the allegations concerned. There are 2 potential breaches of the Code of Conduct here. as you've heard, 3.1, treating others with respect, and 3.3, not bullying or intimidating any person. And as you have heard from the monitoring officer, my view is that there isn't sufficient conduct to constitute bullying, but there is some evidence of a failure to treat the chair, and I think by implication, the town council as a whole, with an appropriate degree of respect. The detailed comments of Councillor Guildford concerning Councillor Cuthbertson are at pages 38 and 39 of your report, which you have probably looked at. At an initial meeting at a coffee shop between the two of them, Councillor Guildford and Cuthbertson, Councillor Cuthbertson described the town council as a completely dysfunctional organisation, which Councillor Guildford regards as unacceptable. Councillor Cuthbertson would frequently attend council meetings. There was particular controversy about a petition that was organised by various local Lib Dems with, I think, 498 signatures concerning a play area. Councillor Cuthbertson asked to speak at a meeting of the town council concerning that petition, and the chairman, because it was not an agenda item, refused permission. That created, I think, by all accounts, a degree of upset and raised voices. Councillor Guildford's recollection is that Councillor Cuthbertson was, whilst trying to keep order, accused of being a dictator and undemocratic. Councillor Guildford feels he was following best practice and standing orders, which is that an item doesn't get discussed unless it's on the agenda, and that's the normal rule in terms of town parish council guidance. Other examples of behaviour included a meeting at an August meeting of a council recreation and open spaces committee, where Councillor Cuthbertson is reported to have erupted in a fit of anger, threatening to file a code of conduct complaint himself. And on other occasions, Councillor Cuthbertson has apparently insisted that as a City of York councillor, he has oversight over the decisions made by the town council, which to my mind is a misunderstanding of the quite separate roles of the city and town council. The other issue, which was alluded to, related to outflows of sewage, something quite topical. Members of the public complained about outflows into the River Foss. Suggestion of the chair was that there should be a meeting with Yorkshire Water, which a clerk was invited to organise. It appears that Councillor Cuthbertson took over that process and insisted that should be a City of York Council meeting with Yorkshire Water, and the town council were not involved with that meeting. On another occasion, Councillor Cuthbertson insulted the town council by stating to the clerk that the council was being run, quotes, like a Wild West town. As you will hear, Councillor Guildford is American, so I think on a number of respects that is an unfortunate and inappropriate comment to make. I should say that Councillor Cuthbertson, if you have heard, denies these allegations. There is some evidence that the comment made about the accusation of dictator actually came from somebody else in the context of a heated meeting. But I feel, and you'll see within my report, there are a number of examples of situations where Councillor Cuthbertson has treated Councillor Guildford, and as I say, the town council as a whole, in a manner which is clearly disrespectful and has sought to put the chair down. Clearly, politically, politicians are entitled to raise political points to get their own advantage. But the issue with regard, for example, to the funding of the play area, I think was something quite sincere, where Councillor Guildford felt it might be inappropriate for the town council to take monies in a situation where perhaps that they shouldn't receive them. And there was quite a genuine discussion taking place, and that was used for political reasons to an extent that perhaps was inappropriate. Accordingly, on balance, my view is that although Councillor Cuthbertson could not be accused of bullying, there's not a consistent course of bullying conduct, he has failed to treat Councillor Guildford with an appropriate amount of respect, and is therefore in breach of para 3.1 of the relevant code of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did let you run over the 5 minutes because you're in the flow, and I will extend the same courtesy to other people during the hearing as appropriate. Can I ask the panel then, and the independent person, Any questions for the investigating officer? Yes. Mr.
Thank you. Hi, Stephen. I'd like to ask some questions about the facts first, rather than get into a discussion about whether it amounts to a breach or not. But I just want to be absolutely clear about what your balance of probability decision making has been on the various allegations. In the first instance, are you satisfied, based on the evidence that you've seen, that Councillor Cuthbertson called the town council dysfunctional and said it was being run like a Wild West town?
Yes, I am.
You are, thank you. Are you satisfied that he said that Councillor Guildford was being a dictator and undemocratic?
I'm not entirely satisfied. I have to say, I think there is some doubt about those particular comments being alluded to him.
Okay, I mean, when you spoke to people, obviously you've got a former councillor saying specifically that she was the one who said it in the report. You've got a denial from the member. The way it's worded in the complaint is that this was said. It's not even alleged that Councillor Cuthbertson said it, simply that he was there when it was said. So where's your doubt? Where are you thinking that he did say it?
It's always difficult in a situation where it's one person's word against another.
Sorry, I'm just seeking to clarify who has accused him of actually saying it.
Well, my view is that Councillor Cuthbertson was certainly accused of making those comments.
Okay, well,
And clearly
I'll explore
that's
that
said within Councillor Guildford's statement. So that's his recollection.
Fine, that's great. I can ask Councillor Guildford that later then. Obviously you've touched on the oversight. Again, it's something that I think has been denied. What was your balance of probability decision on whether he said that or not?
I'm not sure that Councillor Cuthbertson does entirely deny that point. He actually quotes a textbook on local government law and says, you know, to some degree there are situations, for example, the ability to co-opt members, the ability to hold a local review, which means that to some degree district councils do have certain powers of supervision.
So his attempts to justify a comment
Yes,
that he made.
I think, though, I have to say that the way it came over to me that Councillor Cuthbertson was not relying on some arcane principles of law. He was saying to some degree that the town council is inferior to the unitary authority and therefore should in effect do what it's told. Which I think is going too far, frankly.
Okay, and finally, could you just, as if I was watching it, describe what you think happened when he erupted in this fit of anger? What did he actually do?
I understand that he shouted. There was clearly a lot of unhappiness about decisions made. And I think, to be fair to Councillor Guildford, he applies the constitutional requirements as he sees them very strictly. And if an item's not on the agenda, then he doesn't regard it.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously it's only Councillor Cuthbertson's conduct that's under consideration here. And I understand it was quite a heated meeting. And that there were various people expressing concern and upset in a heated exchange about whether this matter was going to be heard at the meeting or not. But obviously we've got to focus very much on Councillor Cuthbertson as an individual. And I'm just not quite clear what he's done personally to justify
I think my understanding of the scenario is that there was a meeting where he expected a certain matter to be dealt with. It wasn't dealt with. I think Councillor Cuthbertson says he has a hearing problem, and I think a brass band were practicing in the room next door or something. And when he found out that the matter was not going to be considered at that meeting, he became quite angry.
So did he acknowledge becoming angry at this?
He says that he raised his voice, but says that he may have done that because it was a noisy room and he had to do it in order to be heard. And there were noises off. Now, the reports that I have is that he didn't just raise his voice, he was angry. And I think it was Councillor Wyatt, another councillor, just looking at on on page 43, there was something of a before Councillor Wyatt shouted for order and for the chairman to be respected. And so I think that's indicative. Raised voices, bad temper, people speaking out, being told they're going to be reported for code of conduct breaches as well, and you know.
And is it that? I mean, is it your consideration that he's failed to treat Councillor Guildford with respect? Is that tied to a specific incident, or is it a sort of collection of these?
Several individual incidents. There's the ambushing over the petition, the issue with regard to the Recreation and Open Spaces Committee, that the having conversations with the clerk about political ambitions, which I think are, you know, it's perfectly reasonable to have political ambitions, but perhaps inappropriate to bring the clerk into that. And it seems like an undermining campaign, accusations that the chairman of the council is running an organisation that is dysfunctional or like a Wild West town, all seem together to be a number of individual incidents which are showing a climate of disrespect to the chair. Now, it will be no news to members of this panel that there have been a number of problems with this council, and the chair of any authority sometimes has a difficult role in terms of keeping order. But it does seem, I'm afraid, on this occasion that it's gone beyond political debate, which is perfectly fair, or arguments about whether procedures have been followed correctly, which is also fair, into actually personal disrespect towards the chairman and the office of chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Abby? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. I'd just like to explore some of the points in more detail that Councillor Orams, Mr. Orams raised, if that's okay with you. He asked many of the questions I would have asked originally, but I'd just like to go into slightly more detail in respect of your responses. So just to take the final one first, you found that on balance, that there were several incidents in which Councillor Cuthbertson showed disrespect to Councillor Guildford and by extension to Haxby Town Council. And you gave a number of examples. Some of them I think were in public meetings, but not all of them. Or were they all in public fora?
I think that's great. Some conversations took place in private scenarios. So certainly they were not all in public meetings. I think that's
so
fair.
If we just focus on the ones that were in public, that were witnessed by those in the room, and I believe they were also webcast. Were they webcast? Or they certainly were on Zoom, were they?
I'm not sure.
They were just a public meeting. Yeah, that's fine. So several incidents you felt from public meetings constituted a lack of respect. And one or two in particular that I'd just like to go into a little bit more detail. The issue of the town council being inferior to the city council. And we've seen the explanation from Councillor Cuthbertson. However, in the meeting itself, so the bit that was observed by members of the public as well as members of the town council, are you satisfied that he made an allegation that the town council was inferior and should basically do what the city councillors tell them to do?
I don't think there's clear evidence that was said in a public meeting, if that's the question.
Right.
So,
that is the question.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And on the occasions in which he shouted the fit of anger, are you clear from what was said there that pointing out that he couldn't hear that he'd been passed over, it constituted a lack of respect?
I think simply having to speak more loudly, which is perfectly understandable. I have hearing problems of my own. I totally understand that, would be acceptable. However, I think the anger that was expressed is going beyond the need to speak loudly to be heard. It does actually relate to an anger addressed personally towards the chair, which transgresses what would appear to be acceptable within ordinary political debate. Whether that anger was real or whether that was theatric for political effect, I don't know, but the effect on the chair, and this was perceived by other members of the council as well, was that this was not conducive to the proper conduct of a local authority meeting.
No. So if it's okay then to just go on to what follows from that. You've made conclusions and you've made findings that on a number of occasions, and you've now outlined what those occasions were, that Councillor Cuthbertson did breach paragraph 3.1 of the Code of Conduct, but not 3.3. I'd just like to explore that a little more with you as to why you actually came, the threshold, if you like, for lack of respect didn't then move into outright bullying of an individual and by implication of the town council.
There used to be some quite good guidance on bullying from the Standards Board for England that is no longer with us, but bullying is typically a course of conduct, typically over a course of time, that has the effect or intent of demeaning somebody and causing a personal effect upon them.
So okay, if we just explore that statement. You've already said there were a number of incidents, both in public meetings and outside of public meetings, over an extended period of time, and we've got a date. We've got a timeline, a chronology of these incidents. Why does that not then fit that criteria of behaviour over a period of time that was designed to undermine?
I think I would say that although there were a number of individual incidents, they were of different natures, of different times. Some were in private, some were in public, some were comments that were made to others, for example, the clerk. But it did not feel to me to be part of a sort of distinct and long-running course of behaviour with the intent to demean and undermine the individual personally. The other associated fact is you have somebody who's the chair of an authority who therefore has comparatively high status, which perhaps is different to an ordinary situation where a bully might be a senior person bullying a junior person. So I didn't think it crossed the threshold. It wasn't something that was consistent meeting in, meeting out, that constantly Councillor Guilford was being undermined, although there were many occasions, but I didn't think it was enough to be a consistent and long-running course of action. That's my opinion. It may not be yours, but that's
so let's just explore, if we could. Explore that. Is that okay, Chair? Is that all right for me to carry on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if we just explore that, that you talk about higher status and lower status, perhaps being a threshold, a criteria for something to constitute bullying. But isn't the allegation that has been made, and I think you have on balance found, that by saying I am superior to you, in that I am a city councillor, you are a town councillor, I have oversight, you should do what I say, which I think you paraphrased earlier. Does that not, in and of itself, constitute, in the minds of, and we have to take it in the minds of both the complainant and that the person complained about? I don't know, I don't think we can call them a defendant. That there is a power differential that's in the minds of those individuals, whether true or whether not true. It's a perception.
I mean, that is true to some degree. It was partly about the difference in status of the authorities as well as the individuals themselves. And I think Councillor Guildford also has concerns over the, as it were, political attempts of a member to try and perhaps change the control of the town council. In my view, obviously, that's politics. That's a perfectly normal thing to do. So that, you know, seeking to find ways to change the balance of power is something that's politically normal, and I would not regard as bullying. But the ultimate decision is for the panel. In my view, it didn't quite cross into the situation where somebody is upset, perhaps unwell, a junior employee being bullied by a senior employee, which is more of a normal bullying situation. I say that's my view. Ultimately, the final decision is for yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just at this point, I'm conscious as a member of the public who's struggling to keep track because doesn't have sight of any papers. Do we have a spare copy of papers anywhere that we can, they are in the public domain? Of the agenda and supporting documents. It's online. If we don't have a set, then I do apologise for that. But it's not written on. I'm just conscious that if a member of the public has made the effort to come, then they should be able to follow the meeting as clearly as possible. No. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Moving on. Sorry, you've got some questions as well, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair, and Stephen, thank you for your comprehensive investigation report. I think most of what I wanted to say has been expertly discussed by my colleague, Councillor Pavlovic. I really wanted to just focus on the anger, the anger side of things, and forgive me because you have already answered this, and I just want clarification for myself. So we have the benefit, or not, as the case may be, of knowing Councillor Cuthbertson, and whilst that doesn't have any bearing on what we're doing today, I am aware of his hearing issues, as you've alluded to, and that voices can be raised. I'm also aware that in parish council meetings, I'm a member of 5 parish councils, that you know, debate can be heated and that voices can be raised, and very often people will raise a voice in response to other raised voices, and so for me so for you to define that somebody has behaved in an angry manner, as opposed to being one of a number of raised voices in a heating meeting, how have you come to that particular decision?
I think from, not just from what Councillor Guildford said, but other statements, I think Councillor Carmichael might have the opportunity to speak later. But it's clear that there was a great deal of anger that was expressed. Even if you look at the comments that are made by Councillor Cuthbertson, I'm looking at his comments around page 54 and 56. He said his comments did make me annoyed. I replied further, raising mine beyond the level of his own. Knowing that there were no residents or members of the public present, I explained what I felt was wrong about the conduct of the meeting. The meeting had been badly run and disrespectful to the members of the public who were present. I believe that he and Councillor Carmichael failed to act acted in an unacceptable way. So, from what I gleaned from that, from the comments of not just Councillor Guildford, but Councillor Carmichael and Councillor Wyatt, it was more than just raising a voice to be heard. It was something that was angry and bad-tempered. Now, at the end of the day, as I understand it, the town council did receive the grant for the play area. So to some degree, it was a storm in a teacup. Now, Councillor Guildford, you might feel very fairly, took the view that he didn't want to be accused of having a comparatively prosperous part of the city, taking money that was designed for poorer areas, and wanted to check with officers that he wasn't, as it were, failing to follow the rules properly. And he was therefore simply doing the right thing. He wasn't doing a thing for personal advantage or credit or to undermine others. But it led to anger. Whether that anger was real or synthetic, I don't know. But it clearly created, say, a meeting that could not be operated properly because people were shouting at the chair. And I think the comments of the other councillors involved makes me feel that it wasn't just somebody who was getting a little bit cross or having to speak up to be heard. It was somebody who was being angry, and comments that apparently were made, say, to Councillor Carmichael, threatening to report Councillor Carmichael himself under the code of conduct, and telling him, you should know better than to stop me from speaking. Seems to form a sort of part of a course of conduct in my view.
Thank you for that. One area for me, if I may, there's some comments on page 65 from Councillor Cuthbertson asking for a number of witnesses to be added to your investigation. And clearly a lot of your rationale has been on the balance and the number of issues that have been brought up over the time period. You decided not to talk to all of those people. What rationale did you use in deciding who to further investigate and who not to use?
I think the first thing I would say is the difficulty that I was placed in, and certainly Councillor Cuthbertson himself was making comments about the time it was taking to get the reports completed. Because he didn't speak to me at the outset, which would have been a better opportunity to identify witnesses, he came back to me very late in the day, after the draft report was published, in fact. But what I did decide is that it was appropriate within reason to speak to others in order to get both sides of the story. I did make contact with Councillor Paula Widdowson, who I think has responsibility for issues related to water within the council. Obviously, Councillors Hollier and Pearson were already involved because they were subject matters of what went on, and Councillor Beverley and also Councillor Crawford I did speak to. So that meant that I was speaking to pretty much as many people identified by Councillor Cuthbertson as identified by Councillor Guildford. With respect to Councillor Guildford and the two other councillors that work with him, Carmichael and Wyatt, and I spoke to 3 or 4 people that were on the list. So I have to say I don't agree with Councillor Cuthbertson's comments that I didn't, as it were, get the other side of the story. And to be fair, with regard to the water situation, Councillor Widdowson said, well, yes, there are regular meetings with Yorkshire Water concerning flooding. As far as he was concerned, that those meetings were simply carrying on as they were. Now, I think Councillor Guildford might have a view about that, but that's what she says. And you've heard from the former town councillor, she says that, well, actually, think it's her that accused Councillor Guildford of being a dictator, not Councillor Cuthbertson. And I think perhaps in a raucous meeting, perhaps there could be an issue about quite who said what, raised voices, who actually used which words. So I think I have spoken to enough people on both sides to have an appropriate degree of balance. I didn't speak to everybody on the list. If I had have done it, would have delayed things considerably, and then there would have been an issue in terms of delay for the meeting.
And you clearly say that in your report. You say it would have been impractical to have so open to all 8 additional people. But your comments actually don't necessarily help me, because a lot of the outcomes from your report relate around the balance of probability. And you haven't really given me a rationale as to why those individuals were further questioned and the other ones weren't, apart from time.
Well, he listed individuals concerning various matters. So in terms of, for example, Yorkshire Water, he listed City Councillor Widdowson, who I spoke to.
Yeah.
In terms of events at the full council meeting, spoke to Councillor Beverley. So I thought that was enough. And Councillor Crawford, in terms of the historic relationship, which isn't really directly relevant to the incident's concern. So I thought I spoke to enough people to get a degree of balance. But I do have to say again, Councillor Cuthbertson frankly did not help his position by coming very late into the day with these things, I'm afraid.
And you've made that point very clear. The other question I've got is historical issues. Some of this now goes back quite a long time before the actual complaint came in. Do you have a view over how far you go back when considering it? And I do accept there have been building issues at Haxby, and there are a number of things which have happened to me many times, and people have maybe stepped slightly out of line, but we've had a friendly chat afterwards. But it builds up over time and is actually part of the actual complaint. Do you have a view on how long a time period should be considered?
In my view, general historical issues aren't particularly relevant. The incidents complained of are the ones that are within the code of conduct complaint that was submitted by Councillor Guildford, and therefore it's really background in terms of whether the general relationship going back some years were good or bad. I perfectly accept your point, and I think it's kind of dangerous getting later on to the process that it's often appropriate to have a discussion, and in fact I think Councillor Guildford does say that the issue in terms of the petition and in terms of concern about the play area, somebody could have had a conversation with him, it could have explained more fully what was going on, rather than there being a situation where somebody was trying, as it were, to ambush with a large petition saying we aren't going to get our play area. But I think generally speaking, it's the incidents complained of that I'm looking at rather than the general relationship.
Thank you very much. Monitoring officer, oh, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for answering all of these questions really quite clearly. I'd just like to talk about some things that you've made reference to that I wasn't 100% clear on in your report. And if we go to page 9, in section E, specific issues, third paragraph down and then fifth paragraph down, but third paragraph down, it is clear that, and it is corroborated by Councillors Wyatt and Carmichael, that on occasion his behaviour has been aggressive, insulting and disruptive towards Councillor Guildford. In particular, I note situations where Councillor Guildford has sought to maintain order at meetings and to make the point, brackets quite properly, that a matter cannot be discussed at a council meeting unless it has been placed on the agenda and appropriate notice to be given. Is that your conclusion?
Yes, it is.
Right, sorry, yeah, I was just clarifying that is, so you have considered that his behaviour has been aggressive, insulting and disruptive?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say it's commonly the case that people become frustrated if they are told matters can't be discussed. I accept that,
Yeah.
but I think the question of how he reacted to it, really.
Yeah, it's whether it crosses a line. And I think with those statements, you're suggesting that it has.
Yeah.
And then in paragraph 5, there's a couple of issues. The second line down, they clearly are misleading with respect to the reasons for town councillors having concerns. What's misleading? That's the bit I'm not sure. And who's misleading whom?
Yeah, I mean, this is in relation.
Yeah, I marked the line and I thought I've written, what does the investigator mean by this word?
Yes, if you look at the Liberal Democrat focus on page 77.
Yeah, and that's what bit I want to go on to.
Yes. And there's a paragraph there on the front page.
Yeah.
It was hard to believe that some members of Haxby Town Council then argued at an Open Spaces Committee meeting that the money awarded for the toddler play area was not needed and should be returned, ! Surprised at this, we launched a petition. The suggestion is that some members of the Hackney Town Council, and I think that that's a clear reference to the chair. I mean, clearly I'm reading between the lines. Said that money was not needed for a play area and therefore it should go back to the city council. Now, I mean, politicians obviously sometimes, maneuver the fact a little bit to suit their purpose, but that's a pretty clear attempt to undermine the chairman. It's just that the view of the chair of the town council doesn't want money for a play area, rather than the fact that he was simply seeking to properly understand whether his council were properly eligible for the money, and they would not be accused of behaving inappropriately by obtaining money that was meant for other more deprived perhaps part of the city.
Totally understand that. And therefore you've concluded from that that was a misleading comment and constituted an attempt to undermine the chair.
Yeah.
So I then get on to the focus. Did you come to a conclusion? And I'm looking at page 77 now. The Haxby and Wigington focus from councillors Ian Cuthbertson, Andrew Hollier and Ed Pearson. Do you consider that there is a guiding hand here? Do you believe that this is a comment from those councillors? And as far as this is concerned, as far as this hearing is concerned, Councillor Cuthbertson is one of those councillors.
Yes, because there's a lengthy quote within that page from Councillor Cuthbertson saying that.
So you would consider that the comments there are, and the conclusion that you subsequently then came to, that this was an attempt to undermine the chair, was his hand, essentially.
Yes, I mean, what I would refer to as my introductory comments. Initially, as you'll be aware, my report was about all three members together, and I think the view of the panel was that we separated off. But I think it seems quite obvious to me that Councillor Cuthbertson was very heavily involved in that willful misunderstanding. Frankly,
that's really helpful. Thank you very much. That's me done.
I just want to go to the monitoring officer as well, just in case there's anything to do with that item. I'll take it.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be clear, Stephen. So if you're saying that the comments that have been submitted that were on the focus on page 77 were jointly authored, but you believe were led by Councillor Cuthbertson, if they were jointly authored and published in a document that originates from all three of the councillors, if we were to accept that submission, my understanding is that all three would be complicit and not just Councillor Cuthbertson. And if that's not the case, then we can't accept that as evidence. That's just my
let me say, my view is that Councillor Cuthbertson must have been very heavily involved in writing this article, and the fact that there is a substantial quote from him means that must be the case. Now, whether the other two members were involved to some degree, they may have been, hot and to what extent, but given that the article is based around a quote from Councillor Cuthbertson, it feels to me that Councillor Cuthbertson certainly is the prime mover in terms of that article.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, I'd just like to ask some procedural questions. You've indicated on a couple of occasions now that Councillor Cuthbertson communicated with you via correspondence. Did you offer him the opportunity to have a face-to-face interview or a virtual style interview, as opposed to just it being by written correspondence only?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say I've probably done 40 or so investigations like this over the past few years, and I can't recall any other occasion where a group have failed to speak to me individually, either in person traditionally, or obviously since COVID via Zoom or Teams. I did ask that opportunity, and I'm very disappointed that we were not able to do so. Later on in the day, he did suggest a conversation, but that was after the draft report's been completed, and I'm afraid that was locking the stable door in many respects, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Are there any issues that you asked him about, but he did not respond? So was he I don't want to put the words, but I was going to say, was he quite selective in the responses that he provided to you? Or were there still outstanding issues which you had to repeatedly go back on?
I did have to go back on one occasion to get further detail. And I think inevitably, I would have to say, you're always going to get less detail with a pre-printed list of questions and a written response, because it means the discussion can't continue. You can't ask a supplementary, so it narrows it down. That's the question.
Chair, if I may, just one
Sure.
final question. And the panel has already raised reference to, there are known issues relating to Haxby Town Council, and the Joint Standards Committee has been heavily involved in supporting Haxby Town Council. Have you been able to separate this complaint from the existing issues and the recommendations that have been made by Joint Standards Committee to Haxby Town Council, which are not related to this complaint at all?
Yes, I feel I have. I mean, obviously, I'm aware of the fact there's a difficult relationship between various members, and that hasn't helped. But I have worked hard to separate out this from other relationship issues with other members.
Whilst we're on the topic of the focus, can I ask the monitoring officer, and you may want to take this into private session because I'm asking for advice, but it is general advice. We have quite clear guidance on social media use and how that relates to the code of conduct. We don't have any clear guidance on how political materials can be fed in when they are outside of the City of York stroke parish council process. Do we have anything on that, or is that still being developed?
Chair, I'd suggest you go into private session and we can just debate that a little bit more.
Then I'm quite happy to do that if people are. I think it is important that we understand that part of the question. Cool. So we will go into private session. I will try to keep that as brief as possible. I don't anticipate more than 5 minutes, just so we can take some advice, and then we will finish the questions. We'll go on to Councillor Carmichael. We'll go to private session, please. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We have had a discussion on a legal issue, which may well come back later as appropriate. At the moment, there's no need to make further comment on that. It just helps us with our questioning. I think we have one further question request. Mr. Owen, to the.
Thank you. Sorry, Stephen. We were talking about the Focus newsletter in particular, but also some of the conversation around the criticisms that appear to have been made by Councillor Cuthbertson about the Town Council. And I just wondered whether, obviously, it's very important that members of the panel here consider a councillor's freedom of speech rights and the importance it is for local councillors to be able to take a position that's contrary to others. And I'm wondering if you could just talk us through how you weighed that up against your decision that this actually did cross the line and deserves sort of regulatory intervention.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I won't pretend it's an easy or straightforward issue. And you say, obviously, politicians have a right to run political campaigns, but what I think you have here is something that is really directed towards disrespecting a chairman who is trying to do the right thing by a combination of barnstorming at council meetings when clearly items couldn't be discussed because they weren't on the agenda, backing that up with a petition that was, I'm afraid, on misleading grounds and a newsletter, and you put all those things together. It's not just arguing against a decision of the town council on policy grounds, but actually opportunism in a way which is really directors being disrespect towards, for whatever reason, the chair. And I think he's entitled to feel that he has been treated badly by individuals in that circumstance.
Thank you. One last and final question here, Councillor Padua.
Thank you. On page 12, in your conclusions, and this is the only chance that we really get to talk to you as the investigator, so I do want to explore this. You say, after some consideration, I find on balance that Councillor Cuthbertson has not sought to bully. So clearly this was something that you have spent some time going through. After that consideration, how was the balance weighted in your own mind? 60-40, 55-45, 52-48?
I couldn't put a number on it. What I would say is, if at every meeting it was reported that Councillor Cuthbertson had shouted, undermined Councillor Guildford, and had made him become personally very upset, you know, and we've all seen cases where members of staff have been, off sick with mental health issues, had to leave the room in tears and that sort of thing, then that will be bullying. But I think, frankly, firstly, politicians are expected to have thicker skins. Many bullying cases relate to employees who feel they can't speak up against perhaps seasoned elected members. I didn't think it was that far down the road towards bullying, in my view, but I can understand that other people might come to a different view than I did.
Sorry, I just really just need to go back on that. So the behaviour in and of itself that you found, had an individual been perhaps less emotionally resilient, it would have constituted bullying, but because that individual is a politician and is held to some sort of different threshold, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. I'm just trying to interpret. I'm trying to interpret what you're saying.
Hypothetical, but possibly the case. But generally, bullying is a course of conduct rather than a few incidents. But yes, in a hypothetical situation like that, then that is certainly possible. And this panel has probably seen examples of, say, clerks to councils that have been bullied by a bullying chairman or something like that. But I say it's hard for me to go any further down the road than that, because you're asking me to deal with a hypothetical that doesn't really exist. So no.
I'm not asking, no, I'm definitely not asking you to go down a hypothetical. I'm asking you specifically about these behaviours.
Yes,
Had they had a different consequence for that individual? So let's just take the behaviours that you have found proven. Had they
Yeah.
had a different consequence, would you have constituted that as bullying?
that is potentially possible. That's
Right, thank
probably-
you,
Yeah.
thank you. That's what I needed to know. Thank
Okay.
you.
Are we all done? Thank you very much. So the next part would be to ask the investigating officer to question his own witness. You've asked for a witness to be brought along. Councillor Carmichael has gratefully come along to join us today. And then there will be questions to Councillor Carmichael from the panel afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Carmichael.
So,
I'm going to refer primarily to points that were made within your comments that are within the report, which I'm assuming you have some memory of. Firstly, could you just explain to me how long have you been on the town council and what roles you carry out there?
I've been with Hackstead Town Council for approximately 3 years. Apart from being a councillor, I was chairman of the Open Spaces Recreational Committee. And at present, I'm now the vice chairman of the Amenities Committee.
Okay, thank you. And to what degree is the town council run in a political way between Liberal Democrats, Conservatives, whatever?
Meaning, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's non-political.
Okay, thank you. At a meeting, I think in July or August, I think you weren't precisely sure which, Councillor Cuthbertson, you say, demanded the right to speak. And I think it suggested that you said to him, amongst others, that he didn't have the right to speak. And he then made some personal comments towards you. Do you remember what he said to you?
That meeting was on the 12th of August. It was an extraordinary meeting held for the purpose of approval of monies towards the Ethelward playing field, which had been put on hold by advice from a chairman of the council, and also information I had received ensuring that it was a non-political, there was no strings attached to this money, and that the money was not being taken away from other areas of people that are of the private areas who are Haxby, not saying we're rich, but we're affluent, that we might not need it, require that money. I did not say to Councillor Cuthbertson, sorry, that he couldn't speak. I said, in a minute, I'm not, and I tried to explain that a resolution has been made. At that point, he just would not listen to what I was saying. He did raise his voice. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not a person that likes to shout. I'm actually a quiet speaker. And at that point, he accused me of not letting him speak and not letting him produce a petition of names that he had. I went on to reiterate, saying that there was no need, because if he was to listen through this meeting, things were being resolved.
Okay. The comment that's in your statement is that he said to you, "You should know better. You're a soldier."
He said that I knew I was in the armed forces, had been in the armed forces. I can't remember if he called me a soldier, but I was actually in the Royal Navy. But he did say that I should know better. Did I know Queen's regulations? Obviously, I did, because I used to run by them as a member of the Regulating and Police Branch of the Navy. And he said that I should know better, and that the regulations are the same, are a part of the regulations on the council, which, but which I understand what he was getting at. But at that point, he was just wanting to have a go, because he was annoyed that I wouldn't let him stand on his platform, stand up and say what he wanted to say. As I said, there was no really any need for it. The meeting was made for that purpose of approving this monies. towards Ethelward playing field.
Okay. And did Councillor Cuthbertson threaten to report you under the code of conduct?
Yes, he did. He said that I'd broken the Northern Code of Conduct, and he was going to report me.
For what reason?
Because I was, the way I was acting, I was disrespectful to him, which I was not disrespectful at all. I called him Mr. Cuthbertson by mistake, which he shouted Councillor Cuthbertson, which I did apologise. I have a thing about people Mr. or Miss, but he raised his voice at me at that time. I did not shout at the man, and I had no reason to lose my temper with him. I just let him get on with what he had to say, and my reply was that things were going to be sorted, are being sorted. That's why we're having this meeting.
Okay. Within that meeting or others, did you witness Councillor Cuthbertson accusing Councillor Guildford of behaving either in an undemocratic manner or potentially even accuse him of being a dictator?
I has said that a full council meeting. I can't remember what month it was, but there was a full meeting, and Councillor Cuthbertson and Councillor Hollier were also at that meeting. And Councillor Cuthbertson had raised his voice at the chairman. I cannot remember the exact words. I don't have my statement with me, but he was. It was the way he was acting was disrespectful, and would not let the chairman speak or put across what he needed, what was the requirement of the meeting. It was being interjected by Councillor Cuthbertson.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
That's it.
I apologise for that. Questions from Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Carmichael. I just want to further look at a couple of things that you mentioned here. So at the meeting on the 5th of August, this is the meeting you've referred to, was the open spaces meeting. So at that meeting, because you told us in your introduction that you are no longer the chair of the open spaces committee, but at this meeting you were the chair. Is that right?
No, I was the chair. The meeting you're talking about was the 12th of August. I have a copy of the agenda in my hand. Of the 12th of August was the extraordinary open spaces committee meeting.
Sorry, forgive me. So I get my kind of chronology correct. So the meeting at which the petition was raised, and you didn't allow it to be discussed because it wasn't on the agenda. What date was that meeting? Was that the 5th of August or the 12th of August? I'm just slightly concerned.
No, I didn't say it wasn't to be discussed. It was on the agenda on the 12th.
Forgive me, Councillor Carmichael. So the meeting to which you have just answered questions from the investigating officer, what date was that meeting?
12th of August.
The 12th of August. Forgive me, I got it as the 5th for some reason. Okay, and that was okay. So I want to just question you about. So as ward councillors, we do an awful lot that we think will benefit our residents, and we work very closely with parish councils, and I myself am a member of a parish council as well as a ward councillor, but I also have 4 other parish councils that I attend. Very often we do things for the very best reasons, the very best intent, not necessarily for any political gain. When our efforts are not received in the way that we would want them to be received, it is understandable that we will get frustrated and upset. And I just want to be really clear that because you were there and you were the subject of the comments and the object of Councillor Cuthbertson's frustrations, do you believe that his frustrations at the efforts that he had gone to secure this funding, do you believe that his frustrations were as you would expect them to be, or do you genuinely believe they were far more aggressive than you would expect them to be? And I'm being very careful with what I word, because what I want to find out is did he just respond?
He was challenging me.
Thank you. So you clearly believe that it was above and beyond what you would expect a response to be. Thank you. That's what I wanted to get to. Thank you, Councillor Carmichael. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One question for me, it doesn't, this meeting of the 11th of August, it was actually on the agenda to assign a minute taker at the meeting. Who took the minutes? Do you recall? And 12th of August, yeah. Who took the minutes, and is it common practice to ask somebody to take the minutes at a meeting of the council, any of the meetings, or was it just that it was an extraordinary meeting at that time? I can't at the moment. Councillor Carmichael.
The person that took the minutes on the clerk's behalf, because our clerk was off sick. I remember, I think, Mr. Scott. We didn't have a clerk running officially. We were self-sufficient, and Councillor Guildford took the minutes of that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Just one little follow-up on that. Are you aware that there is a system where you can get a locum clerk to stand?
I do know. Yes, you can get it from.
So am I right in assuming that because it was an extraordinary meeting, that procedure couldn't be followed?
That's correct. That's not the time.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. Yourself? Sorry, I do call Alex.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Carmichael. I've got a couple of questions, please. Now, in the evidence bundle, we've got an email exchange that happened in the run-up to the meeting on the 12th of August, which begins, and I'll refer you to page 61 of the bundle, with Councillor Cuthbertson asking if he can present the petition to your committee. And your response is shown above. And the last line of your response, one of the things we've been asked to consider is Councillor Cuthbertson claiming to have the council here as some sort of oversight over the town council. Now, in your email there, you've said, "May I remind you, sir, that Haxby Town Council receives its instructions from central government and not from the city of York Council, and we as a council are politically independent when in operation." Could I ask what prompted you to make that remark, please?
There's been quite a few instances which are in the focus, which you've got three different separate editions. And there's quite a few instances, and I can't put them off the top of my head without having copies, that some of the efforts that have been conducted by my council or the city of Haxby Town Council have been piggybacked by the three councillors or the ward councillors. And as written, like for example, the one with the Ethelwald playing field put Haxby Town Council on the bad light, which was not really the case. And I brought that up at a meeting with a ward councillor, which has not been discussed, saying that I found that quite bad, that the proper side had not been put across. It was a one-sided making my council and the decision, sorry, I had made look bad. So any resident reading that would then get their backs up against Haxby Town Council.
So if I've understood it, you wanted to make it clear
Yeah, we're not political.
to these councillors that Haxby Town Council were responsible for their own decisions, and that the Liberal Democrats couldn't dictate to them how they should decide to accept or spend grant money in their newsletters. Would that be a fair?
It's the grant money. They can obviously publish that grant money has come from the City of York Council. However, any work that has been done by the separate council, they should not piggyback on it or other person's achievements to glorify themselves. And I looked at it on a political view because next year we'll run for government, and that'd be a good thing for Putin there to boost. As I say, I'm not a political person, but at the same token, I'm not stupid, and I felt that any moves that we make or made, we were being downtrodden, and I wasn't going to let that happen, especially with the monies from Little Ward playing field.
And I think, would it be fair to say that that also comes across in your subsequent response to Councillor Hollier, when he again has talked about the permission? This is on page 59 of the bundle. And I think your concerns and frustration, it would be fair to say, come across in this email as well, about your fear that they're looking to take credit for things that the town council are doing and to potentially hijack your committee meeting.
Well, no.
I think you stated at the end you are most welcome to attend as a member of the public, but if anyone tries to hijack the meeting, I'll have no hesitation but to suspend it.
Well, that's right. I think you would do the same if you were holding a meeting trying to progress an item and you had somebody that was going to come and hijack the meeting, you would suspend it.
What concern did you have that it would be hijacked? Because I don't see anything in their email suggesting that that's what their intention was.
Just past attendances to full council meetings, anything of highlight, which again, members of the public are more than welcome. It's a point of law, but it's like a hornet's nest. There's if something was thought, remembering that again, against Councillor Edward Pearson, but we do have a member of the ward as a member of the Haxby Town Council, which in my view shouldn't be allowed. However, that's by the past. That's the MKMEs, but any information would then be to the other ward councillors. So if you wanted backup, it was their human nature. I would do the same. I want backup, so I bring my troops in to back me up as well.
And then when it came to the meeting, the decision was taken not to have a public participation section. Is that right, or have I got that wrong?
Right. There was a public participation. You can't do that. It's against rules and regulations that any committee meetings that you have are open to the public unless you do stress it's in camera. But you then have to give the reasons why you're holding that meeting in camera, like you had one just recently today.
So were these councillors then able to raise their point about the petition during public participation?
They could have done, but it was already said as at the meeting on the 12th of August that we held that there was no really reason to, because it was not denied. The request was not denied. It was an ambiguity without for any ambiguities, and it was proven that the money was 100%. It was kosher. That it was that wasn't politically. There was no political motivation behind it until I read in the Focus. It was published in the Focus.
So you didn't allow them to speak because.
Well, to speak, I didn't say you couldn't speak. I just said that there's no really reason to, and they got heated because I was saying, and therefore I was saying no. And I didn't say no.
At that point, had the decision been made in relation to the grant?
Yes, that's why we held a meeting in the first place. That's why we held that meeting.
So the hostile exchange that took place after the decision had been made for the grant to be awarded to that part. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think that I have a follow-up from Councillor Padley.
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify, from my understanding, you effectively made a decision that you did not want to give the Lib Dem councillors a political platform at these meetings.
I didn't know what the meetings to be used as for a political platform. As I said before, we are totally independent. As far as I'm concerned, that's where we're independent. But I did not want to be used as an instrument for a gain.
Yeah, thank you.
Monitoring officer.
Can I just clarify one thing around the understanding of public participation? Because the City of York has a very defined profile of what is public participation, and public participation is actually a feature on our agendas and written into our constitution. And I'm just looking at, I'm sorry, I'm electronic now, so I might have a different page number. So I'm either on 97 or 95, I'm not really sure, but it's the agenda for the meeting of the 12th of August.
95.
And the agenda there sets out, it doesn't, unlike City of York meetings, it doesn't specifically set out a bespoke section of the meeting dedicated to receiving views from members of the public. And I'm just wondering if there is some confusion between a City of York councillor as a ward councillor coming to your meeting, expecting part of your agenda to be set aside so that they can give their views as members of the public for a time limited period, or whether there is just no provision within your standing orders and your agenda to allow members of the public to have a proportion of the meeting to speak and give their views. So I'm just trying to just clarify if there is a confusion over the definition of what is public participation. I think it's understood by everyone, Chair, that members of the public are entitled to attend a formally constituted meeting of the town council. And obviously we have a member of the public here today, and similar to this scenario, is entitled to sit, observe, and not disrupt the meeting. So I think that's common amongst all, but I'm just wondering if there is a confusion in what is public participation and what do you believe their expectations were of you around public participation?
Well, as you see on the agenda, it does have that members of the public are welcome to join and will be given the opportunity to speak regarding items on the agenda before meetings, if they wish to do so. But I know on the meetings that we have, sometimes we're now having members of the public joining. That when I hold a meeting, or I've been holding meetings, I ask members of the public either at the beginning of the meeting or the written thing, depending on what's the agenda is. I might have something that's confidential on the agenda that I don't want the members of the public holding the camera. So if that was the case at the beginning of a meeting, I would ask members of the public if they've got any comments or wish to discuss. And it's usually the 3-minute rule. I don't go that way, I'm afraid. If someone wants to tell me something, I want to know about it. However, depending on what the criteria is, that my understanding is if somebody's got something to say, they come to the meeting, they've got a reason and they've got the right to say or make an opinion.
Can I just follow up on that slightly, if I may? So the meeting of the 12th of August that you chaired does have that preamble which talks about public participation, but it's not an item on the agenda. Was that offered by you and read out because some members of the public may have come along without a copy of this document, or was it not?
It wasn't. I didn't read it out, but there were copies of the agenda, and most people would, especially councillors, if they didn't have a copy of the agenda, they would go to the notice board and read it off the notice board.
So it wasn't verbally reiterated at the meeting?
No.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Carmichael, just on page 97, point 9, at this point, Councillor Cuthbertson was invited to speak. The councillor declined as he felt he should have been allowed to speak at the start of the meeting. So he's indicating, and you've minuted, that he wasn't invited to speak at the beginning of the meeting in accordance with your procedures, which are on the previous page, which says that members of the public are given the opportunity to speak regarding an item on the agenda before the meeting if they wish to do so. So clearly he wasn't given that opportunity. I need to ask you, did he indicate to you that he would like to speak before the meeting?
No.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. It's Councillor Guildford, your opportunity to ask both Councillor Carmichael any questions that you may have, and because of the cordial setup we've got here, quite happy for you to ask questions of the investigating officer at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could, there's a quick question, I hope, for Mr. Pearson. In my pre-hearing, one issue I took the statement which said that we might. Yeah, there, I must state it twice instead of once. My apologies. So let me state that in my pre-hearing checklist, I made a comment that I had some disagreement with one of the statements you made in your report. And that said that, and I'll have to paraphrase because I can't find where it is in the pack right now. It said evidently Councillor Guilford changed the rules to effectively disadvantage members of the public speaking or not to allow members of the public to speak in a meeting. And that this had caused some consternation with the board of councillors. What evidence do you have that I changed any rules? There were, to my recollection, no change of rules.
Sorry, if I suggested that, no, I'm not suggesting that you, as it were, changed the rules. I think they were the rules as far as I understand it. Sorry if I misled you in that respect. Okay. I'm not suggesting that you changed the rules to suit your purposes or anything like that. I apologize if that was the impression I gave.
And secondly, in the discussion about bullying, I appreciate your definition, your legal definition of bullying, and I would agree, but there's also bullying that happens peer-to-peer and in effect upward bullying that ACAS actually defines as well. So you don't have to necessarily hold a position of superiority, I would imagine. But given that, that in the complaint, it actually sets out a number of incidences that were spanning over 3 council years. And it showed a demonstrated behavior pattern from Councillor Cuthbertson of disrespect. I would say that in fact, that does meet the preponderance of a, shall we say, sustained approach of disrespect. An attempt to, by claiming that he had oversight over the council, that it was in fact a case of bullying. That he was trying to say, I'm more important than you are, therefore you need to listen to me and do as I say. Now, I think that's kind of the definition of bullying.
Can I just interrupt for a second? There's nothing wrong with the question that you've put, Councillor Guilford. It's just you will get the opportunity to make a statement of your case in the second.
Yeah, I was just trying to provide a background to my question.
I think that's question, but I'm just worried that we go a little bit off piece with that. But we will take that question.
Yeah, my apologies if I've stepped out.
I'm happy to, as it were, take that as a question from Councillor Guilford. I mean, I'm looking at your complaint form and it struck me that you were focusing in particularly on a number of identified incidents. And I think speaking about the background over a period of time and saying whether that might constitute bullying, I regarded that as being rather broader than what was the content of your complaint form. The panel, as I said earlier, may take a different view to myself. That's their decision.
Okay, thank you. That's really the only 2 questions I really had. I may in my statement raise an issue that might require clarification, but for now I think that'll.
And we'll take that clarification. Have you got anything for Councillor Carmichael?
Not at this point in time.
Okay, then I think it's an appropriate time just to take a little comfort break. We're going to take 10 minutes and we'll reconvene at 10 to 12 if everybody's comfortable with that. Okay. Forget the fun. Thank you very much. And we'll stop the recording at that time. We'll return. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back now onto a live stream, and welcome back anybody who's viewing from home on the webcam. Moving on, we'll now take Councillor Guildford, who again, the honour of 5 minutes to put your case and state anything before we go into questions. And as I was to the investigating officer, if you run slightly over, then I won't interrupt you. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and panel members, for allowing us to come here and speak to you today. I'd like to start by saying I didn't think I'd have much to say today because I thought the case by the investigator was made pretty soundly. But my goodness, if I made some notes. I'd like to offer at the beginning that over most of the 10 years of my membership of Hawkesbury Town Council, I found Councillor Cuthbertson to be polite and quite amenable, and I spoke to him on a number of matters to do with the ward, and as a resident as well, and so I was quite taken aback with the attitude in 2019 when I became chairman, and started with a discussion about that we had that I put in my notes about the meeting in the local coffee shop to sit down and have a chat and try to understand ways that the ward and the town council could engage together. And what I got instead was, shall we say, a resume of my shortcomings and how our council was dysfunctional, and that I need to get a grip and I should go down to Wigginton and see how a real council operates. And so I actually thanked him for that advice because I thought, well, you know, let's see how things go. My view of chairmanship at that time was I simply run an orderly meeting that reaches lawful decisions. And beyond that, it's up to the council to decide its directions. That behavior continued, and later in that year, one of the ward councillors showed up at my home to tell me how disappointed the ward was in me, that I had interfered in City of York Council business. And I only raised that because clearly that was sent by Ian. The reason is the issues raised are ones that Ian Cuthbertson has kind of had to be in his bonnet over for a number of years. Particularly, they said that they wanted me to bring to the council to rip up the parking along the village in Hawkesbury, plant the grass and put picnic tables in. And that they were most disappointed with me that I had interfered in the establishment of a library at the Scout Hut on that little playing field, even though I had absolutely zero input into that discussion. And in fact, the Scouts had been signed to an NDA, so they couldn't speak to us. We following on, because Ian had a period of illness, and so was not so much in evidence as the other councillors. We got to the raised issue of Yorkshire Water. There was just over a year ago, I think, a release of sewage into the fosse through a burst pipe or main or something in the sewage plant there. And a resident approached the council and asked if we could arrange a meeting with Yorkshire Water where residents would be allowed to attend and question what measures have been taken to ensure or to try to ensure that this doesn't happen again in our community. I asked the clerk then, Mark Scott, if he would contact Yorkshire Water for that. He contacted Councillor Cuthbertson and asked for his assistance in making that approach, when he was advised quite strongly that he would be picking that up and that the town council would be excluded from any meeting. He also had, if I step back a minute to the May or June of 2019, after his meeting with me, he attended our offices and gave the staff members a bit of dressing down about how the council was poorly run and clearly dysfunctional. That I felt was pretty disrespectful. Now, between that and the visit to my home in 2019, I wrote to the leader of the council, who's also the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, which Ian's a member of, and I laid out my concerns that this was not a conducive way for the ward councillors to engage with the town council. That was ignored. And so I persisted with that for a few months and finally got to speak with Councillor Smalley, who, as I understand at that time, was the whip for the party. And we had a discussion about our concerns. That didn't yield any benefit. And then, of course, we come to the to the big blow up, which was last summer, we had been looking at improving the play area, the toddlers play area, and that's the word playing field, as you'll have seen mention of in the statements. And an article showed up in the press that indicated that perhaps monies that had been awarded in a grant to Haxby were earmarked for deprived areas and meant to be distributed based on an independent assessment. I felt as chairman, it was my duty to bring that to the council or to the committee and to say, this allegation has been brought up in the press. I've been unable to get a hold of the officer of the council to determine what the actual conditions were. But in looking at where the grants landed in multiple numbers, perhaps, there might be some basis in it, but that we needed to investigate that. That led to this campaign and and these statements that I was effectively acting out of a party political nature. It wasn't, it was brought to my attention. And I felt that there was a moral obligation that we should look at what we were doing to see if we were unfairly disadvantaging areas of special need. That, of course, then became resolved. We had the meeting of August 12th, of August 5th, this full council meeting. And in that meeting, the ward council showed up after making it quite clear publicly that they were going to come in and force the town council to change its view on acceptance of these grant monies. And that in that meeting, I made the decision that it was not on the agenda. Now, it's more than just not being on the agenda. When I became chairman, I made a number of commitments to the council. One was that if our committees sharpened up their terms of reference and they operated within those terms of reference, that was delegated authority, and that I as chairman would not be dragging items up from those committees into full council to try to override them. Because if you do, then the committee doesn't have delegated authority in effect. So it properly belonged in the committee. And I advised Councillor Cuthbertson, Collier, and Pearson of that, and told them that I had also asked the chairman of that committee, Councillor Carmichael, to call an extraordinary meeting following a meeting with the City of York officer, and that meeting would be held the following Thursday. They were welcome to attend that meeting. You've heard what's happened in that meeting. I effectively clerked that meeting, took the minutes, if you will, because our clerk was unavailable. Members will know a previous issue that was resolved in this committee with regards to another councillor's behavior. And it had caused our staff members to basically refuse to participate in meetings, and eventually led to them being off ill. So
at some point, I'm going to have to stop you. You've run well over that time.
Yes.
So please wrap up.
Yes. So we in meetings when we didn't have a staff member, we would nominate one of the councillors to take the minutes, and that had gone on for some period of time during this previous issue that was happening at the council. Now, in that meeting, it was a single point meeting, simply for me to update the committee based on the previous discussion we'd had in the July meeting, and updated after my meeting with the City of York councillor, City of York officer, with regards to the distribution of funds and the grant, and whether I was able to answer the questions that were raised in the previous meeting. And also to then raise a motion to move forward with the committee's preferred option for the player now that the funds were available. And that's what's led to Councillor Beverly's resignation. I'd like to say that preferred option was one presented by Councillor Beverly, Councillor Rice, and Councillor Pearson as part of the working group. And they had suggested that the committee have that as their preferred option. So I simply brought the proposal back to the committee and said, it's been 8 months. We've gone around in circles on this. It's time now to close it out. The funding is there. Let's get this done. Of which the committee did vote to do. Councillor Cuthbertson and Councillor Pearson had showed up to present the petition, and they were asked at some point in the meeting if they would like to speak. They were unhappy that they weren't allowed to speak first. But it was clear, the noise had been made that they were going to come in and force the council to make a decision that we were already going to make. There was never any debate whether or not we were going to improve the play area. And it was simply a question of the source of funds and to where, if it was proper for us to accept those funds. And so I advised the chairman that it's chairman's discretion at which point in a meeting people speak. And I suggested that it might be good just to have it after we've already had our discussions so that there would not be any political, say, capital generated by that decision. And that was purely to, in my view, to defend Haxby Town Council from accusations that that we had wanted to disadvantage the members of the public. Ian became quite upset in that meeting. He shouted at myself, he shouted at the chairman, accused he was going to file code of conduct complaints, accused me of not understanding the Local Government Act or the standing orders. At which point I raised up a book that I carried with me to virtually every meeting that I chaired, which was the Arnold Baker book on public on local council administration, and suggested that perhaps he should be reading the book because it is clear in there what the policies or what the law says on public participation. There is no right for members of the public to speak. It is to the judgment of the chairman, but it is best practice that you do so, and we do so on a regular basis. The only time I think that I have denied speaking is to the ward councillors when they were doing this campaign. We regularly have members of the public come in and address the council, and they are always welcome and they're always given an opportunity to speak. And Councillor Cuthbertson was agitated simply because he didn't get a chance to speak before the vote so that he could claim that he had forced the council into a reversal decision that was already going to happen. And so that's where we came to this blow up in August. As I said to Mr. Pearson, there was a sustained behavior. I reached out to the ward councillors on a number of times as the chairman, and I would particularly take Ed Pearson aside and say, Ed, this bickering between the ward and the town council isn't going to benefit either one of us. We're liable to both get thrown out the next election if we keep this up. And I challenged them to find a project that we could work together on. And if they did, and they wanted to publish it in their focus newsletter, I'd be standing right behind them, patting on the back saying, good boys, you did a good job. They refused. And that was on more than one occasion. And the response I always got was, you've got to realize we're politicians. We have to get ourselves reelected, so we have to have something to campaign against. And I thought that's ludicrous. You have to have something to campaign for. People vote for things, not always against things. And I think that when you look at that behavior over the 3 years of my chairmanship, I think it does constitute bullying, particularly when Councillor Cuthbertson made the claim that he felt he was superior to the town council and that he had the oversight right over our deliberations. And so that's my statement. And I'm want to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I have to say that I did let you run substantially over the 5 minutes. I thought it was interesting. I did check with both members of the panel up here that they were both content to, but the investigating officer did not have the same privilege. Are you quite content that we let that run over?
Yes, very happy, Chairman.
Just trying to make sure that we can continue to have a balanced debate. So questions from the panel, or indeed, I'm quite happy to say them from the independent person. The panel first, Councillor Pavlovich. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor. I want to explore something that we raised with the investigator, and that is about your role as chair and the various incidents that have been outlined in your complaint and by the investigators. How did that make you feel, both in the role as chair of Haxby Town Council, but also you as an individual taking that role? Excuse me.
Thank you for those questions. It's interesting. I was thinking before I came to the meeting and I was reviewing the statement from the councillor, it seemed to me that the whole defense was based around, it doesn't matter because Mark Guilford's a bad man. You know, we've got ex-councillor Crawford and Harkness who say he's overbearing and difficult person. We've got, you know, ex-councillor Beverly left because she didn't like the way I chaired the meeting. I think that's just part of the whole dialogue that Councillor Cuthbertson has displayed in the last 3 years. And I'd say before that, I quite liked the guy. I was kind of surprised at how this developed. First of all, I never expected to become chairman of the council, but when I did, I thought, let's go and have a chat with Ian and let's see if we can't find a way to work together and some projects to work together on. And I'd say it was one of the loneliest positions I think I've ever had, because not only did we have the previous situation in our council, which members will be aware of, but I had to deal then with, shall we say, a rather insulting group of ward councillors. And this developed factions within the Hexby Town Council, which made it virtually impossible to run orderly meetings toward the end. It was, I have to say, in May, I didn't even suggest that I was even interested in being chairman anymore. It was debilitating. It was emotionally exhausting and physically exhausting for most of the time.
So, sorry.
No, please.
To paraphrase Mr. Pearson's comment, you didn't take it as effectively water off a duck's back, that you as a politician or a ward, a town council politician, are robust enough just to take that challenge. You say you found it very lonely, exhausting, and emotionally debilitating.
No, I did find it exhausting. I would have appreciated a bit of support from time to time, you know, even if it's someone, I mean, I'm open to people who want to come up to me and say, hey, let's go aside, have a cup of coffee and have a bit of a chat about perhaps you could have done something better here, or maybe we could do things differently. The previous clerk and I did that on a regular basis. After meetings, we would have a postmortem and I'd say, how did the meeting run? Is there ways that I can improve? Are there things we could have done differently? How do we make sure that the will of the council is carried out? Mm-hmm. So I like contrary to the picture that's been painted by Councillor Cuthbertson, I prefer a collaborative approach. One that says you give, for instance, the committees the delegation to go out and do their job, and you let them do their job. Mm-hmm. It becomes too tiring to try to pull all the strings all the time.
Mm-hmm. And so has this complaint played any part in your decision to no longer stand as chair?
Look, I think.
Or was it other issues?
Sure. You and I had a meeting last week where you were briefing about the remit of this council or this committee and whatnot. I didn't bring these complaints lightly. And I think I joke with you that I think I probably had the largest number of complaints dealing with during my chairmanship. I think Councillor Cuthbertson said there were 8 or 9. I think it was closer to 13 to 15 when you count the others that were not progressed. It was a ludicrous situation. And I attempted to go, as I said, to the leader of the Liberal Democrats in the council to get some support to try to find a way to broker a discussion. I spoke with the party whip. I approached ward councillors directly and said, hey, let's try to find a way to work together more productively. And at each time I was rebuffed and the shall we say the abuse continued from them. And to come to my home and accuse me of interfering in City of York matters, when then they turn around and spend 3 years doing exactly the same thing back to Hexby Town Council, I thought was a bit rich, quite frankly.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Rowley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Guilford, for your submissions, which I've noted. I just want to look at what appears to be some slight contradiction with yourself and Councillor Carmichael. You mentioned with regards, and please forgive me if I've got this wrong, you mentioned with regards to the meeting on the 12th of August that subcommittee had already effectively made the decision to accept the funding before you allowed the ward councillors to speak, because you feared that were they to speak first, they would have put some political spin on it and would have claimed that they had effectively changed the minds of the. That's what I've kind of the notes that I've written from what you said to us a moment ago. Is that correct?
Well, if you look on page 77, you'll see in their focus newsletter, Playground Boost, and Councillor Cuthbertson and Councillor Pearson's sitting there in front of the top of their page, certainly getting their picture snapped and claiming credit effectively for what the town council have done. And this was, I think this came out just after that meeting.
Sure.
But what the point I'm making is that they were quite vocal about what they were planning on doing, what they were trying to achieve. And the council was already being, shall we say, pursued on a number of fronts about decisions we'd make and shall we say, discord being fomented amongst the public about our decisions. And we had to get to a point where we say, look, this is a non-issue. This was never about whether we were going to improve the playground equipment or not. We had pretty much committed we were going to do that, just a matter of figuring out where we're going to get the budget for it. There was a question about the morality of accepting a certain tranche of money that was offered. Once that was resolved, and I came back and I spoke to Councillor Beverly, I spoke to the chairman, I spoke to the clerk, and I said, look, I've spoken with the officer. This is what I found. I said, I now feel pretty comfortable with the way those funds were distributed. I don't see that as an issue for us as a council. And I asked for Councillor Carmichael to call an extraordinary meeting. Now, you know, in the full council meeting that we had in the 5th, a few days earlier, they had been quite troublesome in that meeting. And when I ruled they couldn't speak, instead they sat there texting Ed Pearson, who was on our council, and he was accepting text and trying to ask their questions on their behalf, so that even though they had been denied the right to speak. All right, so they were not acting, shall I say, in an honorable fashion in any way.
Okay, sorry if I might just stop you there, Councillor. Sorry, forgive me, because I wanted to listen to what you've got to say. I'm just trying to get into my head. So the meeting on the 12th of August, this was the extraordinary meeting.
That's right.
Okay. My notes were that you said that you didn't allow them to speak until after the meeting, until after the decision had been made, because that decision was one that had already been made, and that you didn't want them to speak because they would have put a political spin on it and would have said that they had. So am I right in thinking what you said? Because that is.
Let me clarify. In that meeting, I was of no doubt that the committee would agree to accept the funding.
Sorry, forgive me. Sorry,
it's important. It's an important point.
The answer to my question is quite a simple one.
Yes.
So you did say that you didn't allow them to speak until after the decision was made.
Yeah, that's the answer. I was not the chairman for that meeting. I could not allow or disallow. My guidance to the chairman, understanding the Local Government Act and our standing orders, was that it's chairman's discretion at which point in the meeting people speak and address the council.
Thank you. So this is really interesting for me, because Councillor Carmichael has referred to page 97 of the minutes that says at this point Councillor Cuthbertson was invited to speak. The councillor declined because he felt that he should have been allowed to speak at the beginning of the meeting.
Yes.
But Councillor Carmichael is saying that they weren't offered or didn't request to speak at the beginning of the meeting, but you seem to infer that even if they had requested that, you wouldn't have advised that request be allowed, because you said in your submission a moment ago that you wanted them to speak after the decision so that they couldn't claim any political influence over that decision. And can you see where, for me, the contradiction lies?
Yeah.
So either you had a discussion that you wouldn't allow them to speak, in which case Councillor Cuthbertson's comments on page 97 are actually quite valid, or that you had already pre-decided that they wouldn't be allowed to speak beforehand because you feared, for whatever reason, you fear that there will be a political balance and some political leverage made by them speaking beforehand. So for me, I'm just slightly confused at the contradiction that I see there.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Let me then try to clear that up for you. They were not disallowed to speak. They were allowed to speak. They were offered the opportunity to speak. They didn't like when that opportunity came. Okay, it was a matter of timing. Was it unusual? Yes. It's first time in my recollection that we've ever done that. But as I said, there was quite a bit of noise being made, and there was, in my view, a justifiable ground to protect the council's, shall we say, standing, that we showed that we were going to, this is a decision we were going to make, regardless of interference from the ward councillors. And had we allowed, I mean, we've watched this Focus newsletter enough, and I don't care which party somebody's a member of, but the newsletter goes out, and if we did something, bang, ward councillors out there claiming credit for it. And it just got tiring after a while. And on this particular issue, enough of a fuss had been made, and I had been painted in a light that was false, saying that I was doing this for political grounds. I wasn't. I was doing it because we needed to have a discussion about what the right thing to do was as a council. And that was, I think we have a right to do that without interference from the ward councillors.
We'll move on. Mr. Oram, any questions?
Yes, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm just going to find the part in the papers that I wanted to talk about. Just running through the allegations, Councillor Guildford, because obviously you've made them. Could you just clarify when you heard Councillor Cuthbertson say the town council was a dysfunctional organisation?
Well, the first time would have been in 2019, just after I became chairman, and we met while he was holding a surgery at the Costa Coffee in the village of Haxby.
And do you think, if you are concerned that an organisation is dysfunctional, that a councillor has a right to express such a remark?
Yes.
Thank you. And when did am I right to say that the term "run like a Wild West town" was a comment made privately to the clerk? And that you heard from the clerk that he'd said it?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And we didn't get the clerk's evidence, did we, on that? No, thank you. But I think Councillor Cuthbertson accepts that it was probably a remark he might have made. Turning to the next allegation, did you personally hear Councillor Cuthbertson accuse you of being a dictator and undemocratic?
That's a difficult one. There were a number of comments flying from Councillor Cuthbertson, Councillor Pearson, and Councillor Beverly in that meeting. My recollection is I did, but it was, shall we say, an intense environment at that point in time. And I was trying to maintain control of the meeting where the three people were intent on disrupting it. So that's my recollection. That's the only way that I put it.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your honesty on that. Absolutely. I imagine it must have been a very difficult situation to deal with. Now, the only real account that we have in the bundle specifically of detailed recollection of what happened at the meeting on the 9th is given by Councillor Cuthbertson in his written response to the questions that the investigator asked. Having reviewed that, you said you reviewed that prior to this hearing, and I'll refer to page 54 for the meeting on the 9th, and then I think 55 Are there any aspects of Councillor Cuthbertson's recollection that you take strong objection to, or do you think it accurately reflects your own recollection of what happened at the meeting? If we deal with the 9th first, maybe, which I think is dealt with under
But where,
three A on page
3A, okay.
54 and 55.
Yes, I remember that he did ask me if I could speak more clearly, which I did try to do. But we were in a room that was, shall we say, maybe not real conducive. The acoustics are what they are, but it was the only room we had available for the meeting. And he did not approach the council at any point prior to the meeting to say that he had a hearing problem and to ask if some accommodation would make us. I'd have asked him to come sit closer to the top table where I was sitting.
Yeah.
No, I do recall he said that, and I said I would do my best to speak up. And then he has that effectively he's going over what happened in the full council meeting where I said it was not on the agenda. And as I said earlier, that's because as chairman, my policy was you hand delegated authority items to the committee.
Absolutely. So that's a fairly accurate
Yes.
evidence in terms of answering the question about what happened. And then in terms of the meeting of the 12th, when you took the decision to move the ability to speak from members of the public to the end, to after the decision was made, did you have any concerns that may cause issues? I mean, it strikes me as being similar to giving an objector to a planning application the opportunity to object after the decision has been made. You know, so I think you're going to have immediate concerns. That's going to be met with frustration.
Yep.
What did you have any concerns around that?
Yes, I did, quite frankly, but I didn't see that we had many options open to us. I find it particularly distasteful when Ian comes into a meeting and tells me as a ward councillor, I have oversight responsibility, so I can come into your meetings and tell you what you decide, and then sit and want to drape the flag of I'm a public participant. Right?
Just on that point.
Let me just clarify that point. And this is this kind of a dual heading type of role. And so my approach is as chairman, if someone's going to be disruptive in a meeting, I go to the rules and I enforce the rules rigidly, right? So rules are, and by law, he doesn't have a right to speak. It's at the discretion of the chairman, and the time and the amount will be set out. For instance, there'll be a time frame that's generally set out in standing orders of so many minutes. And but when that speech happens is down to the chairman. And Councillor Cuthbertson and Councillor Pearson had already demonstrated that they were going to be disruptive and that they were going to cause, shall we say, try to cause discomfort for the town council. And so it was not an ideal situation or even an ideal solution, but it was the only one I felt that was open to us.
Sorry, and finally, could I just, on the oversight section, could I refer you to page 56 and Councillor Cuthbertson's response to the allegation that he claimed as a ward councillor that he had oversight? And we're looking at section 4. And he writes no, and then talks about an exchange he had with you.
And which paragraph is that in?
Sorry, in section it's
Section 4.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could I ask you to read that and make any comments that you might have on the accuracy of that response? I mean, obviously, he's very clearly denying ever saying he had oversight or that town ward councillors have oversight over the town council.
Yeah, well, I find it interesting because I actually showed him the Arnold Baker book and suggested that perhaps he should go to it.
Yes.
Because I often would get, shall we say, somewhat teased by my fellow counselors about me always carrying the yellow book, right? Because I had it there, and I actually read the book, right?
So could you tell me what was actually said then, when he specifically said that I, as a ward councillor, have oversight responsibilities for the town council?
I believe, from my recollection is that I said to him that parish town councils and primary and principal authorities derive their authority to act from the same act of parliament, which is the Local Government Act. We don't derive it from the Constitution of the City of York Council, right? I in no way consider that we are equal to the scope or responsibilities of the City of York, and I understand that there is overlap in places where the city and the town or parish council should properly consult each other and work together. We do that in planning, we do a number of different things. No problem with that. What I do have a problem is when a ward councillor comes to our meeting and dictates outcomes. That to me is a problem.
I completely understand where you're coming from, councillor, but to go back to my question, when did councillor Carmichael claim to have oversight?
You mean,
I've seen, sorry, Cuthbertson, because I've seen councillor Carmichael's response obviously coming out twice saying you do not have any oversight role over us. Clearly, it's something that's felt by councillors at Haxby that this is what ward councillors believe or feel. I'm just trying to establish when it was actually said by councillor Cuthbertson or claimed to be the case.
when the chairman of the committee called on him to speak,
Mhm,
and he was quite upset about that.
mhm.
I kind of expected he would be. He claimed that basically we didn't, we were not running the council party, we were acting in contravention of our standing orders and the Local Government Act. He was going to file a complaint, and he says, and as a ward councillor, I have oversight.
So he used
He
those
used the
words.
term in the meeting when he was called on, when he was having his rant, because he was unhappy at the way, when we allowed him to speak.
Okay, thank you. I've got no more questions, Chair.
Okay, if I may, just one quick follow-up, just a little bit confused here. When you were talking and answering the questions from Mr. Oram, you said about the meeting of the 9th of August and that you weren't aware that Councillor Cuthbertson had hearing problems.
Yeah.
And if he had made that aware, you would have made provision for it.
Yes.
So up until the 9th of August, you were not aware of any hearing problems with Councillor Cuthbertson?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Because when he came into meetings, he'd often sit back in the far corner of the room and had not made any comments to me beforehand.
No, I'm quite happy with your response. I was surprised at that time that you didn't know that, but thanks for the confirmation. Councillor Pepperidge.
Yeah, just to go back to the reason for excuse me, the reason for refusing interventions from the floor. Obviously, the city councillors at that stage were members of the public. They weren't members of the town council. Is it usual, and I don't know Haxby Town Council's meetings at all, is it usual for interventions from the floor, interrupting the flow of a meeting? And has it happened on previous occasions? And if it has, how have you responded to that?
Well, it has happened. Typically, I raised the point that my understanding of the law is that the public has a right to observe meetings in real time. So they can be present, or for instance, if there's a live feed, they watch it, as long as they can observe and hear in real time. That does not include the right to interject into the actual proceedings themselves. And in fact, the advice given, I think in the Arnold Baker book, is to say that there should be a separate point in the meeting, separate from the deliberations, and that the care should be taken that they are not interjecting themselves into the deliberations themselves. I've had great difficulty in getting that to be followed by certain parties. Generally speaking, members of the public recognize it, but there are some, as I'm sure there are in all councils, who decide that they're going to interject regardless of what you say. And mine is generally to advise them that they need to kind of not.
So you have done that in the past,
Have,
and that's
yes.
not just on these occasions with city councils. This is with members of the public as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are we happy? One more. Okay. Councillor.
Thank you. I've just got one more question and it follows on from Mr. Oram's questioning of you. So, and it's really important for me to understand this process. So, Councillor Carmichael said that at no point had Councillor Cuthbertson indicated that he wanted to speak at the meeting on the 12th of August, that he wanted to speak. He hadn't said to you that he wanted to speak. And you actually, and Councillor Carmichael, in our questioning to him, said he didn't ask before the meeting to speak. And you've clearly said that your advice to Councillor Carmichael was not to allow them to speak until the end of the meeting, until the decision had taken place. Page 55, which Mr. Oram has alluded to, at the top of page 55, point B, the agenda for the extraordinary meeting on the 12th of August had on it a decision about returning the playground equipment grant to City Council. Councillor Cuthbertson says that he wrote to the clerk and the committee chair, Councillor Carmichael, beforehand, asking to speak at the meeting in respect of the relevant agenda item. Now, Councillor, this is probably for both of you, really. I'm happy to take answers from both of you. So, Councillor Carmichael, you said to me in my question to you earlier that he didn't ask to speak before the meeting. Are you now?
The email, yes, you sent me an email and I replied to the email, which is it's in your bundle, my reply.
Okay.
I can't quote because I don't have it in front of me.
No, so your comment to me, your answer to me that he didn't ask to speak before the meeting is actually untrue, because he had asked to speak before the meeting, because he had emailed you to ask to speak before the meeting.
The email would indicate yes.
Sorry.
He did ask with the email, but my reply to the email was, it's not a problem. And if I remember rightly, I did point out what action I would be taking at that meeting. So there was no requirement for him to any petition or to speak out. So I say I can't quote because I don't have the email in front of me.
Yeah, and this is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah,
But Councillor, so the clerk clearly wasn't very well, because Councillor Guildford effectively took minutes.
It took the minutes on the 12th. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get an understanding. So you was the chair of this committee.
Yep. Yes.
And Councillor, sorry, you as the chair of the committee, thank you, and Councillor Guildford, who took notes and clearly advised you, were aware that Councillor Cuthbertson had registered to speak at that meeting on the 12th, but you took the decision, and forgive me if this is the wrong assumption, it appears to me that you took the decision, possibly jointly, because Councillor Guildford has already said my advice was not to allow them to speak until after the decision had been made. So can you just confirm that is the correct understanding that I have of the request from the councillors, from the ward councillors, and the response from the town council?
It was my prerogative as the chairman with regards to speak with regards to the petition. On a personal note, I took it as a threat. However, as a professional person, it was my decision, and I already made it, I already decided, I already intimated my position of which route it was going at the extraordinary meeting. That's why we're having this meeting. However, Councillor Cuthbertson interjected and was becoming a bit heated. All right, he might be hard of hearing. There was some music or a brass band playing on and off in the background. However, he understood what I was saying without having to shout. And I can understand what he was saying, but he was shouting. My decision was made as the chairman, and that's quite rightly so. That was my prerogative. And he was offered, and he did it by email, which upon I replied his email, which you have, saying that my understanding, the information I received, and what direction I was going. So at the end of the day, there was no reason for the petition or to come and start shouting or causing a disturbance.
Okay, so I think between you, you've answered my question.
Right.
I just want to ask one last question, and then I'm done in terms of this bit. So, can you understand that a ward councillor wishes to make a comment and wishes to do some public participation, which he or she believes would have some relevance on a decision? They are then not allowed to speak until after that decision is made. Put yourself in the position of a councillor in that decision. Can you understand how annoyed and frustrated a councillor would be having not been allowed to speak?
Let me handle that if I may. In the meeting, the full council meeting, I have in fact invited board councillors to attend the extraordinary meeting. I advised him that Thursday there would be, I fully expected they would be there. As you see, his letter was to the chairman of the committee, not to me, but the chairman then copied that out to a number of different people, myself included, in the committee members. So we knew exactly what the intent was of Councillor Cuthbertson. And had it been a constructive attempt, then we would have quite happily let him speak at the beginning of the meeting. This was an opportunistic approach that went along with what was already being published about the political party politicking that I was doing in the council and that the committee was doing. Nothing's further from the truth on that. He came to that council meeting to denigrate the town council and to make it seem as if it hadn't have been for Ian Cuthbertson riding over the hilltop, the children of Haxby would suffer because we wouldn't have done the play equipment. And that was not going to happen.
And that is in your opinion.
That is in my opinion.
Thank you.
And it's an opinion based in a preponderance of statements from the ward councillors.
Thank you very much. We'll move on. Monitoring officer, any questions?
Just a couple of procedural things. When you became the chair in 2019, did you change in any way any sort of rules or procedures in the agenda from, say, previous chairs around at what point in an agenda or a meeting either members of the public and or ward councillors would contribute or speak? And did previous chairs have any differentiation between members of the public and identified ward councillors if they attended a meeting? Because some parish councils do have specific sections identified purely for ward councillors that I'm aware of in York. Others, it is just purely they're classed as members of the public. So did you change in any way, any rules or standing orders when you became the chair?
I was involved in editing the standing orders before I became chairman, and that didn't complete until after I was chairman and brought those for approval. They are the now templated standing orders that were in force in 2019. The only changes I made to the agenda were one of full disclosure. So if I or the clerk or any other member of the council sought advice from an outside body, they had to disclose that to the council. Because there were some rather, so we say, destructive discussions that were happening and people going off and saying they had support from something or some other groups. And so it's about full disclosure. And secondly, to ensure that we had a section on updates and ongoing business so that we could keep track of the fact that council resolutions were being followed. Outside of that, there were no other changes to the agenda item or anything else. The agendas have been consistent, and if you go back and you look at them, you'll see that they've been pretty consistent throughout, well, goodness, I don't know now how many years.
Thank you. The investigating officer, any questions you'd like to?
Yes, just a very small sort of point of fact. If I could turn you to page 100 of the bundle, which is a note from Paula Widdowson, I think is the relevant portfolio holder concerning the issue to do with Yorkshire Water. Now, if I've got this right, Councillor Guildford, a decision of the town council was that a meeting should be convened with Yorkshire Water to discuss the issue of sewage disposals. A conversation then took place between Councillor Cuthbertson and the clerk, and it would appear that Councillor Cuthbertson persuaded the clerk that it was inappropriate for that meeting to take place. And as far as the portfolio holder within York is concerned, she wasn't even aware of the fact that a meeting was being requested. I mean, is that a fair summary of what happened?
Except for the statement that he convinced the clerk that it was inappropriate. He told the clerk that the town council would be excluded from any meeting and that the ward councillors would have that meeting. We had a resident came to a meeting of the council and made a representation at the start of the meeting when there was a sewage leak, and asked if we could facilitate a public, if you will, public forum discussion with Yorkshire Water. When the clerk couldn't get a response through Councillor Cuthbertson, I phoned Yorkshire Water, who were very amenable. They said at the time they couldn't do it because the Environment Agency had not yet made a statement as to the event. So they had to wait for them to determine before they could make any representations. But Councillor Cuthbertson was basically not just trying to dissuade us, we're just saying basically, I'll hold the meeting and you will be excluded.
What was your reaction to Councillor Cuthbertson telling the clerk that a meeting was not going to be allowed to happen?
I picked up the phone to Yorkshire Water myself and entered into a dialogue with Yorkshire Water. On that.
Is it right? Has the clerk now left? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, I am going to just use the prerogative and go backwards in the process. I'm conscious that you've got another question, and so have I. So please.
Sorry, I was just wanted clarification. We've established that he's got no authority over what the town council does, correct?
Yes.
That's your concern with what he's claimed in the past.
Yes.
So surely any meeting around Yorkshire Town Council amounts to a lack of cooperation rather than any sort of potential breach of the code.
State that for me again.
Well, what can Councillor Cuthbertson have said or done to have stopped the town council arranging their own meeting with Yorkshire Water?
All he had to do was say, hey, happy to help.
So so this is about a lack of cooperation.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, we've held a number of meetings jointly. There was a discussion about the rail station, for instance, and we opened that up. The City of York had this. We set up a meeting and residents could come to it and make comments and whatnot quite openly. I've got no problem. It was my express desire from the time I became chairman that we should be participating more fully, and that this constant bickering was destructive to the reputations of the town council and of the ward councillors equally. Thank you.
So one final question for me. The monitoring officer talked about some parish councils, and indeed all the ones that I sit on do, have an agenda item very early in the agenda, which is update from city councillors, giving us an ability to find out what they're doing, which would affect the parish, but not actually within the remit of the parish.
Yeah.
Were you aware that other parish councils have that? And if you were aware, why was it not introduced into your process?
I am aware, and before I became chairman, oh goodness, must have been a good 3 or 4 years before I became chairman, there was an attempt to do that. But getting participation in the meeting and attendance by the ward councillors was not always reliable. There was also some discussion as to whether, I think from the local council association, that ward councillors have no special standing in a town council meeting other than a member of the public. So when we have an item on the agenda that says member of the of the public can come in and speak on agenda items. I understand what you're getting to is, can they say something about something that's not on the agenda? Typically, we haven't done that. And although I think with a supportive and cooperative ward council, I personally wouldn't have a problem with it. As I said before, as a chairman, those rules were generally enforced when there was disruption in order to maintain order in the meetings. I have no axe to grind either way. I think I was quite clear in the first part of my statement that I approached the board councillors very early on and said, we need to find a way to work together. What can we do?
Yeah, you've answered my question, and thank you very much. I appreciate that. If there's no more questions for anybody, I will move on. Now, the next part would normally be the exact same balance with Councillor Cuthbertson.
Could I just make one last comment? Just a really brief comment.
No, I'm afraid comments are separate from questions, and we've moved on because the comments were in the first part of it. I think we have identified everything.
Get the chance.
Yeah, there is a summary part at the
Okay,
end where
all right,
you'll be
thank
able
you.
to put those comments in. As advised earlier, Councillor Cuthbertson has not attended today, but has submitted a written statement on the 20th of August. In his absence, I'll ask the monitoring officer to read out Councillor Cuthbertson's position in response to the complaint. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At page 9 of the agenda, the investigating officer states in his report, Councillor Cuthbertson has given detailed evidence over the way which certain town council meetings have been conducted and has concern over changes in practice. He states that he has treated the town council and its members with respect. Although he accepts that he has been involved with a petition, he denies demanding that it be dismissed at specific meetings in July and August, and also denies seeking to undermine the town council by making posts on social media. He states that he suffers from hearing loss, and this may be why he failed to be clear when some items have been discussed, and potentially why he is accused of raising his voice and shouting. As an experienced councillor and previously clerk to a parish council, he is entitled within reason to express a view where he feels that council meetings have not been conducted in a proper and appropriate manner, provided the extent of this criticism is not expressed in a manner such as to constitute a breach of the relevant code of conduct. From page 49 to 57 of the agenda, the investigator has enclosed Councillor Cuthbertson's written responses to questions raised during the investigation. Pages 59 to 75 of the agenda, predominantly from page 63 onwards, detail Councillor Cuthbertson's written responses and correspondence with the investigating officer to the draft investigation report. In his written statement dated 20th of August 2022 at page, I think it's 113 of the agenda, Councillor Cuthbertson has asked for his statement to be read out, given that he is unable to attend today. As has been explained, I cannot be present at this hearing because of a lengthy dentist appointment, and this is part of some root canal work that is currently being undertaken. I would like to draw the hearing panel's attention that although the suggestion is made in some statements that I have frequently attended meetings of Haxby Town Council, that was only true up to June 2019. At that point, I was given a responsible position as executive member for children, young people and education. And from then on, I could not attend at all regularly because of time needed to fulfill that role. Despite suggestions in the statements of Councillor Guildford and Councillor Wyatt, since the start of the 2019 municipal year, I have only been able to attend HTC meetings in June, July and September 2019, and in August and November 2021. There was also the meeting of the R&OSC, actually I think Recreation and Open Spaces Committee on the 12th of August 2021, which is actually the only meeting being referred to in this complaint. It is evident that there is a good deal of inconsistency between the statements of 3 different witnesses to the extent that there is uncertainty about the exact date of the meeting. Excuse me a minute. And what is alleged to have taken place. There is, however, consistency between the statements of Councillor Pearson, myself and ex-Councillor Beverley, effectively negating what is said by others. The complainant and his witnesses give no evidence of misbehaviour, bad-tempered language or language, in quotes, which cannot be repeated, end of quotes, at any other HTC meeting held since May 2019, and there have been no other complaints of such behaviour on my part. Indeed, ex-Councillor Crawford describes my conduct and interaction with HDC councillors as being exemplary. In contrast, she goes on to give quite damning description of Councillor Guildford's own recurring breaches of the code of conduct and his overbearing and disrespectful behaviour, which resulted in him being stood down from all committees for some months in 2017. I would be grateful if these points could be taken into account at the hearing. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Thank you very much for that. In light of Councillor Cuthbertson not attending, it's difficult to pose any questions, but I would ask everybody on the panel receive those documentations and being able to consider them. Good. So they are, as I said at the beginning, included in our deliberations. So final representations, which will give you an opportunity to add your final comments, Councillor Guildford. So I'll now invite each of the parties to make any representation of the facts in dispute or their final case. The parties will each have, I hope, 5 minutes. Again, I'm not going to be strict on that, but we really need to be quite articulate in the way we put it across to make their representations. We'll hear from the parties in the following order: the investigating officer first, followed by Councillor Guildford. And it's noted that the written submission has been received from Councillor Cuthbertson, and he does not accept the investigating officer's findings or opinions. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll hopefully spend less time than earlier. It's unfortunate that Councillor Cuthbertson can't be here today, but I think you have had a fair opportunity to examine the content of the report and to add appropriate questions. I think Councillor Cuthbertson's comments about certain factual vaguenesses are probably fair points, but having said that, I think it is clear that Councillor Cuthbertson on several occasions behaved in a manner which was disrespectful towards, in particular, Councillor Guildford, in respect of comments made to others, such as the clerk, who I say can't be with us, partly because he's no longer with the council, which were frankly highly inappropriate. Comments in meetings which were not appropriate. I appreciate that there may have been some disquiet about being able to present or speak with reference to a petition. But as I think you have heard, I think some of that anger, frankly, is synthetic, because there was never a suggestion that the town council were going to veto a play area. They were just ensuring that they were obtaining the money in a correct and appropriate fashion, so they couldn't be criticised. And I think that point, frankly, was misunderstood for political reasons and political point scoring. Describing the town council as being like a Wild West town, I think actually is dangerously inappropriate, given that, as you've heard, the chairman is American. If you think in some contexts, you know, equalities matters might come into play there, and I think that is a point. The attitude of Councillor Cuthbertson towards the powers and standing of the town council, I think, are somewhat demeaning, and the fact that he took it upon himself to cancel a meeting which had been resolved to have been held by browbeating the clerk into saying that this meeting is not permitted to happen, is, I think, something which is quite serious. I think if you put all that behaviour together, to me, it is clear and ample evidence that Councillor Cuthbertson behaved in a manner failing to show Councillor Guildford the required extent of respect for both a colleague and for particularly the chair of a town council trying to do its best job for the community. Where I would differ perhaps with the complaint is that I do not feel personally that it passes the threshold into bullying. I think we have heard that the relationship actually historically has been reasonably good between Councillor Cuthbertson and others on the council. But I do feel it clearly is something which falls into the area of disrespect. There may be arguments about whether the way in which the council approaches members of the public and petitions could be looked at in the future, but I don't think that takes away from the point that this is either a question where there has been disrespect in breach of the code or there has not, and I feel that there has been such disrespect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Guildford, again, attempt to stay to the
Yes, I will. Two main points. One is that I'd advise or request of the panel, some of the questioning seemed to be weighted quite heavily to the August Open Spaces Committee meeting. You realize that was a thick end of 3 years of discomfort, shall we say, and it was brought to a head over a very, shall we say, overt act by the ward councillors to discredit the town council, in my view. I would also say that at the start of my original statement, I said, I find Councillor Cuthbertson's defense rather interesting, and that is Councillor Guilford, bad man. So therefore, anything I've done is justified. And I find it slanderous, his comment in there about me being stood down from committees for code of conduct complaint, because that is factually incorrect. There was an attempt by former Councillor Crawford and former Councillor Harkes to basically go on the attack on me and literally try to drive me out of the council. That resulted in a rather embarrassing climb down of the council and a decision that they must quash any actions that they tried to take. And that as a result of that, I presented a motion to the council to remove ex officio rights of the chairman and the vice chairman of the council. And by the way, that is a rule that I carried through myself as chairman, because I felt that there was too much influence being basically exerted on the council by two members, because they sat on every committee, every subcommittee, and their votes were being multiplied. And when you raised any issues that they didn't like, then they would go on the attack. So I find it absolutely typical of Ian Cuthbertson's behavior towards me that he would make a statement such as what was read out here today. Completely unfounded. And I'm willing to provide the documentary evidence that shows what happened in that. And it actually resulted in me, shall we say, educating myself on the Local Government Act, on standing orders, on standing up to rewrite the standing orders of the council. And as I've said before, I've had a relationship with three monitoring officers who I go to regularly for advice and guidance whenever I feel that there is a need in our council for that guidance. So my behavior isn't what's on question here. It's Ian's. And Ian, I think it has been demonstrated quite markedly, has breached both your code of conduct and ours.
Thank you. I'm looking round. Is everybody content? Completed the process? Okay, then we move on to deliberations. So the panel will now withdraw to consider its decision. I suggest we'll come back in some way at 1:30. It's only fair, there are people watching on the webcam, so they know that may well be me coming back to advise people on the webcam that we have not come to a decision yet, but it gives people at home the opportunity to know what's happening and go and make a cup of tea. The Democratic Services Officer will contact any of the parties in this room in order to make sure that everybody's back for when we reconvene. And we're in a position to announce the findings. The monitoring officer, the independent person, and Democratic Services Officer, and I believe legal representation, will also remain with the panel and give the advice that's appropriate. So we would now move, as agreed, into a private session to the decision. Yeah. For anybody who's waiting for the meeting and the hearing to be reconvened, I said I'd come back at past. Unfortunately, we are still deliberating, or fortunately, as the case may be. I intend to reconvene the meeting no matter what at 1:20, 1:40. At 1:40, the meeting will be reconvened and will either give the decision or the decision may be deferred. Good afternoon and welcome back to anybody who's watching at home and you've enjoyed your lunch. We have had a number of deliberations here and we have come to a conclusion on this item. However, the decision notice and the announcement of that has been deferred until after the next hearing taking place at 2 o'clock. So there will be no influence from one decision to the other and the two are taken separately. So that concludes the meeting. I will advise everybody else of that. The next hearing will commence at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.